how do you take all that knowledge that is in the brain of a very senior person because they spent 40 years around this stuff and can very quickly identify things out of nowhere? How do you take that knowledge, embed that somewhere where you can start to transfer some of it to the junior person? And what we call this workflows. So for anybody who doesn't know about Paperless Parts, we are a quoting solution for manufacturers. So we work both with the shops themselves, the suppliers who are going to be, in this case, primarily discrete component manufacturers, sheet metal, assembly shops, kind of small, medium-sized businesses, all the way up to those doing more than 100 million in revenue. We also work with the buyers of that software to help them streamline how they send the RFQ packages to the suppliers to help them get better responses back. So what we typically see when we go to talk to a shop for the first time is they believe that they have one thing going on, and what actually is going on is something that looks a little bit different. And so what we like to do is we like to come in very first and do what's called a process map, where we just have them list out everything that happens in their shop. And often they don't have that done, but somebody usually can kind of walk us through how that works. And then we will draw it for them. And it becomes this kind of incredible moment where you have this entire map built of how your shop works. And we primarily focus it on quoting because that's what we're focused on, is in quoting. And when you can do that, first of all, you can start to see how many extra steps are involved, how many people have to look at things, how long it takes to do things. But it also allows you to start saying, well, couldn't we take software and help? And then that begs the question of, well, you could never do that. And it was, well, what if we could do that? And that allows us to kind of work through that process with them. One of the things that companies do is that we find they don't quite realize just how big of a roadblock or a speed bump or a slower, a bottleneck. They don't quite realize how much a bottleneck quoting actually is, because a lot of downstream problems in a shop that you believe are due to not being good enough at that other thing, scheduling is an example, it's actually a quoting problem. Because if you could quote the amount of time it actually took to get something done, then it would make scheduling it much easier. A great example of why that happens could be outside processing. If you missed that it has to be masked, whatever the part is has to be masked in order to be plated, versus just the whole thing is going to be plated, that will change the quote that will come from your supplier. And what will likely change is not the cost. It will change the cost, but that's not what matters. What matters is the time that it takes. And so having in place an ability to start to look for things like tight tolerances, features that are kind of funky, or outside processes or specific specs that you're going to have to hit for your customer. Particularly, a lot of this world is aerospace and defense. Aerospace and defense has a lot of specs. So being able to identify those things and surface them early allows you to then go in and not make as many mistakes in your quote, which then pays off down the stream when you're going to schedule the job. So the difference between someone who's early in their career estimating versus someone who's late in their career estimating is typically how they got there. Because a late in their career estimator probably spent most of his career on the floor, or is the owner of a shop, right? Like maybe they bought a shop or they become the president of shop. So they know everything. They can look quickly at a print package and say, oh, that's going to be really hard because of that one specific thing. Your junior estimator, just the fact that you have a junior estimator is not that. And they don't have that ability. And so the question becomes in the brain of a very senior person because they spent 40 years around this stuff and can very quickly identify things out of nowhere. How do you take that knowledge, embed that somewhere where you can start to transfer some of it to the junior person? And what we call this workflows, because what you can do is just put guardrails around what the junior person can do, is allowed to do, and then surface the hard things over to the senior person. What can you do to speed up a process? So I think about slow is smooth, smooth is fast, slow down to speed up, use either of those. The question is, how do you lay out what actually happens in your shop? And then go through and look for the bottlenecks, right? It goes back to the goal and trying to find what Where are the things that are slowing things down? But until you can take a step back, detach from your job, and I'm assuming that we're talking to a general manager, a plant manager, a president, a CEO, COO, until you can step back from doing the work. We call this the difference between working in your business versus working on your business. You have to be able to step back and start to work on your business. When you can start to observe what's actually happening and look for bottlenecks, that allows you to then change things. Maybe it's implementing software, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just changing how something actually happens, and that allows you to go faster. How does working with a brand new shop or a shop that just got bought but is very small and is just getting started on their processes, how does that differ from a mature shop, whether it's large or small? Mature shop tends to have exactly what they want to do encoded already. Now, it may not be in software, but they know exactly how they want to handle things because they've been doing it a long time. A new shop tends to be very open to change and suggestions about what to do. So the role that we play tends to be different, because the role we end up playing with a mature shop is, you give us everything you know, everything you do, we'll help you document it, and then we'll help you take whatever we can and put that into software so you can go faster. With a brand new shop, it tends to be, they're asking us, how should I do this? And so we tend to help where we can. It's not really our job, but we have implemented 600, 700, 800 of these kind of quoting software solutions. The skills gap is not a single challenge, right? I think we understand it as a category of challenges, but addressing how to solve it is going to take many different things. It's a nuanced problem that has many components to it. One of the questions that we have had success in trying to figure out, one of the pieces of that multifaceted challenge, is how do I take people who I know I cannot hire skilled enough people to do the skilled jobs? So the question becomes, how do you isolate the pieces of your work, of all of the work? How do you isolate what takes real skill? Which steps in this process really need judgment of a 30 or 40-year-old or 30 or 40-year experienced person in the shop? And how do you try to segment the work so that person only does high-skill things? You try to load all the high-skill tasks to that person and do the lower-skill tasks to other people. Well, that takes the ability to orchestrate tasks. So one of them is in the quoting process. You can step across and have things like setting up the quote. Well, the senior estimator, without a quoting software, just does everything. They download an email, they download parts, they start looking at them, they start setting up a quote file, they do everything. But if you have a system that allows you to handle workflows where you can tag in members to do certain things, you can have a junior person who could be a third of the price, much newer, and available. You can find one, that's the most important thing, to do a lot of that work. Well, as they do more and more of that work and they're more exposed to the shop, they can take on incrementally more, and that allows you to get leverage through the organization. We've seen many examples of shops, customers of ours, that do that specifically. So the question was, does Gen AI help? I would like to say yes, but the reality is there are tools we can implement today. It's a people, process, technologies problem in that order. The people, you got to find the people you can find, put in place process, and the technology in order to do that can be pretty rudimentary. There's a lot of things we can do to help surface using AI, not Gen AI, but just regular AI. A lot of it's LLMs, but not they don't generate anything, to just flag things to look at. Because we believe that AI will not actually replace humans. It works in partnership, and it allows humans to make better decisions. The human still makes the decision, so the AI just is surfacing things for the human to look out for. That's a great way to take somebody who's semi-skilled, maybe they've been doing this for a little bit, and turn them into someone who can do more.